So welcome to another episode of Voices in Health and Wellness, the podcast where we explore the people, the ideas and the innovations shaping the future of healthcare. Today I'm joined by JD Enright, CEO and co-founder of Clear Cardio, a company challenging the traditional reactive model of cardiology through advanced imaging, artificial intelligence and a strong focus on prevention. So in this conversation we're going to explore the business of building a preventative healthcare company, the challenges of changing established clinical thinking, the role of AI in cardiovascular healthcare, and the lessons JD has learnt from growing a specialist healthcare business. So first of all, JD, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Greenland. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
So for those that don't know you, would you mind just sort of giving us a little bit of background about yourself and kind of tell us how you ended up in healthcare?
Sure. It wasn't a direct line, that's for sure. And I probably speak for a lot of people who end up here. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and I actually went to a merchant marine academy for mechanical engineering, and wanted to sail the 7 seas, the high seas or whatever. And during that time, I saw a lot of care that went into the guys and girls at the academy when you're out on ships. And I said to myself, there's a big opportunity here for healthcare, specifically around that space, right? So then I went to work for U.S. government. I worked for the U.S. government for about 10 years. And mostly that time was overseas. And during that time overseas, I noted that the healthcare situation, at least in the areas in the regions that I was located, was seriously lacking. And compared to the U.S., I didn't really appreciate what we had in the U.S. And after I left Uncle Sam working for the government, I went back to school, went to Cornell, and got a degree in business, and then on to Wharton for finance. And during that time, I was working for various companies, one of which was a pharmaceutical company called Astra. And before it was AstraZeneca, now it's AstraZeneca. And that was in Massachusetts. And I was in an engineering role, project management engineering role. And that's what gave me my real first exposure to healthcare I'd say on the drug manufacturing development side, to really see what goes into, early stage, mid stage, and even late stage drug development, which in many cases, if we're talking about, Clear Cardio specifically on the cardiovascular side, but you see that like statins and medications and things, and the significant amount of effort that goes into money, time, resources that goes into developing these new generation drugs. So that was really my real first step into healthcare, was really on the drug manufacturing side with companies like Genentech and Lonza out of Switzerland and so on. And that gave me a good sense and appreciation for the tremendous amount of effort that goes into developing these medications. And so during that period of time, I worked my way up the ladder. So I started off as a project engineer, looking at developing processes to allow those drugs to be manufactured from early stage clinical trials, even tox lot levels. So small benchtop type manufacturing, all the way up to, with Genentech, 30,000 liter stir tank reactors, making Herceptin and things like that, right? So for cancer treatments. And so I started off doing the designing engineering stuff, and then slowly worked into the business side of things. And then ultimately, my last job in that space I was head of global strategic growth investments. So I was out there acquiring companies on behalf of Lonza. So I was based out of Switzerland for a number of years, in Visp and in Basel, which is where their headquarters is located. And I was responsible for identifying novel companies that were emerging out, had great technology, good IP, and specifically in the viral cell and gene therapy space, including things like CRISPR and transfection, gene editing, things like that. Ultimately acquired a number of companies in that role, brought me to Texas because we acquired a very large company and built out the world's largest viral cell and gene therapy manufacturing facility at the time. And that's what brought me to Texas. And it was during that time, right after I left Lonza and started my own company called TMG Core, Texas Machine Group Core. And that was based in Dallas, Texas. And the reason why I stepped out of Lonza and into that, going to start my own company kind of thing, was I saw the importance of technology in the development of these novel medications. One of the drugs that we worked on at Lonza, which really took root in my soul, how important that is, was a drug. We worked with a company called Bluebird Bioscience out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And with our help, they received FDA approval for the world's first curative medicine for adrenoleukodystrophy. Adrenoleukodystrophy is a relatively rare disease, but it still affects roughly 15 to 20,000 young girls and boys, mainly boys. And it's basically a death sentence. It's demyelinization, effectively, and in the brain, and it causes death. And so that us building that facility, investing in that technology to be able to produce that drug product safely, effectively, at a cost that was reasonable, right, and in a time frame that that would facilitate preventing from all of these children from dying effectively from the disease, required a bunch of technology. And I saw how important that was, and it was through technology and applying that technology, the development of and the implementation of that technology, that I saw save lives. Like, truly, I could see, I met the patients, the children, their parents. They would come into the facility and tell us their stories. And so it was really that embedded itself, and I saw how important it was. So I left Lonza after I had built that out. I felt I had accomplished that, and I decided to start a company that focused just on the technology side. Had very little to do with healthcare at all, other than to say it was high performance computing, next generation immersion cooling in dielectric fluids. So we could get extremely powerful computing, because most technology requires, especially nowadays, real high performance computing capabilities. And the limitation is something called Moore's law. Moore's law is like, it's, as your computing power expands or increases, the amount of heat load through the electrical demand increases. And at some point, you just can't cool it. You can get smaller chips that have more power capability, but they also irradiate more heat, and you've got to dissipate that heat or they fail. And so we were able to overcome or extend Moore's law by developing something called two-phase and single-phase immersion cooling, where we would take the chips and the boards, and we developed the most advanced computing in the world at the time, and immerse them in these fluids and cool them and get a lot more computing out of them in a much smaller space, something the size of a cabinet, like you'd have in your office. It could be 100 kilowatts, which was unheard of, and it was portable and self-sustainable. So that was, really my step into technology. During that period of time, and feel free to interrupt at any moment. If you have any questions, please just jump in and I can elaborate on any of that. But I've been known to be a little long-winded, but I'm very passionate about what I've done and what people I'm working with are doing. So it was during that time, as the CEO of the company, that my shareholders required me to have something called Man Insurance. For those of you who don't know, Man Insurance is when you're an executive in a company, whether it's publicly traded or privately held, oftentimes the shareholders, board of directors will require the CEO or other members who are critical, chief scientists, things like that, to have something called key man insurance. So they'll open up a life insurance policy on that executive or that individual, and in case something happens to them, they can then, the company isn't in such a financial or leadership, I guess, position where you couldn't replace that person. And so they could go out and hire a new CEO, bring in a new, and that's expensive. That's an expensive process. Yeah. So the insurance company required me to go to a clinic every quarter, so 4 times a year. It was one of the #1 clinics in the country that I would go to, private clinic. Very expensive, cost about $15,000 every time I went. I'd get there at 6 a.m. I would leave at 6 p.m. I'd wear my tracksuit, and they'd run me through the gamut. It was like, the American Ninja with that show where you're just like from one to the next, like literally room to room to room to room. I'd have like a little snack in between after I'd fasted for the blood work, but I'd go through this whole regiment of everything you can imagine. And I'd walk out at the end of the day with a big binder and a consultation with the doctor, because they do everything real time. So I get all the results the same day, which I thought was remarkable. I'm like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, like, everybody should be able to do this. What I didn't know is that big binder that they gave me was, at the time for me, was like, hieroglyphics. And, I would say, how am I? And they'd say, well, your cholesterol is a little high, but you have a 0 calcium score. You ran on the treadmill for 20 minutes. That was pretty impressive. We didn't see any problems with your ECG. You don't have any skin cancers, and the list goes on. And I'd say, well, is there anything I need to do? Well, you're in your late 40s, early 50s at the time. Just watch what you eat, and that kind of thing. And then they would stamp approved, and the life insurance company would get then everything was good, and I'm covered. It was a $150 million life insurance policy. Wow. So pretty substantial. And I did that for 5 years, 4 times a year, times 5 years. So think about the cost associated with that. But they kept telling me, everything okay. Your cholesterol's a little higher this time, But I was asymptomatic. I had no symptoms. I wasn't feeling bad or anything. But I was in the middle of taking the company public at the time. This was in 2022. And the market crashed at the time. I mean, when you're taking a company public, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of stress and pressure. My cortisol levels, I'm sure, were through the roof. I'm working 18 hours a day, working 7 days a week. In fact, for the first 2 years of me building that company, I lived in my office. I physically lived in my office. I had a bunk bed over my desk, and I put a shower in. It was an 11-acre campus that we built out, 150,000 square foot facility. So I had a substantial size office, but still, I lived in my office. I drove home on the weekends when I could to see my children and my wife of 30 years. But that's what I did. I was that dedicated, as did my chief technology officer. He lived in the office right next to me. So we became very good friends over the years, as you can imagine. But so during that period of time, I was, especially in 2022, we were getting ready to announce, we're going public. We were underwritten by Guggenheim and Credit Suisse and all of that. So it was a big deal. It was going to be a very big IPO on Nasdaq. And then the market crashed. If you remember, the world ended in June, about a week before we were scheduled to announce. And all of a sudden, Silicon Valley Bank went out of business. Credit Suisse got broken up into little bits and pieces. Everybody kind of the whole world stopped. And so we collectively decided that we're not going to do this today. We're going to hold back on the IPO. However, that kicked off a series of events where I decided collectively with the board, we were going to go to private sale. We had shareholders who wanted to exit. They had been in the business for a while. They're a little older, looking for some liquidity. So we decided to go down an exit and we started negotiating with the company. Now everybody knows it's public. It was Modine. It was a very big deal at the time, probably one of the largest private deals out there. So I was living in aircraft, hotels, boardrooms, surrounded by lawyers, eating way too much, restaurant food, certainly drinking way too much wine and whiskey, and probably too many cigars. But that's what you do, like when you're in the middle of a deal. It took us 9 months. During that period of time, I gained 15 pounds. I grew a beard so that no one would see the fat under my neck. I wasn't feeling too hot because I wasn't sleeping very well because I was having dinners with lawyers and negotiating deals, and so drinking a little too late and not getting enough sleep, and it just kind of accumulated. It did accumulate over time. And so I went to my next door neighbors. I'm about 9 months into this transaction, very large transaction. And my next door neighbor is an interventional cardiologist. His name is, and this is coming full circle here, his name is Dr. Raju Kazuri. And he's the guy that nobody wants to see, right? He's the one that you're very symptomatic, or you've had a heart attack or stroke, or you're in the middle of having a heart attack or stroke, even worse. And he's the catheter guy. He's going to go in there. He's going to put the stents and balloons and stuff like that. And his colleagues do the bypass surgeries, the revascularization and things like that. But I went over to his house with a bottle of wine in my hand. And he goes, JD, you look like hell. Like, what happened to you? I haven't seen you in a while. He goes, you don't look good. And when a interventional cardiologist tells you don't look good, you need to do something about that, right? So he said, I want to introduce you to a gentleman. His name is Dr. John Osborne. And Dr. John Osborne took me the next day. I literally went in the next day, literally in the back door of the hospital where he was, doing his thing. And within an hour, okay, now think about the context here. 5 years, $15,000 a shot times 4 times 5, right? You're talking about $500,000, 5 years, going to what's considered the #1 clinic in Texas, for sure, one of the top in the country, private. And he tells me in 1 hour what they couldn't tell me in 5 years. And that is I had stage 2 disease. And by stage 2, a lot of people don't know that. We can actually stage disease now, cardiovascular disease, like oncology has been doing for years, staging cancers, level of disease. So stage 2, I had 260 millimeters of soft plaque. The reason why I had a 0 calcium score, because none of my plaque was calcified. So we know that calcium scores really don't mean anything other than if it's positive that you have the disease. It doesn't mean how much you do and where it is and how active it is and how much plaque you have. We know all of this now. I certainly know it all now. But I had 200 and plus millimeters of soft plaque in my LAD, which a lot of people call it the widowmaker, all right there. So I was at a substantial risk of a heart attack and stroke due to plaque rupture. A lot of people don't realize that plaque rupture is, what causes most heart attacks and strokes. It's not, and I put a whole video out about what that is. So in 1 hour, he told me what they couldn't tell me in 5 years, $500,000 later, and that made me really upset. I got upset for a number of reasons. I got upset because I had spent, or the company had spent $500,000 going to this clinic. I had spent 5 years going every quarter, running on treadmills with masks on and ECG leads and having fingers up my butt and, all of that stuff that they do, right? And me thinking that I'm great, okay, it's worth the money. Only to find out in 1 hour that they did nothing for me, 0, right? They tried to put me on a statin at one point, and I said, well, how do you know if it's working? Well, your cholesterol come down. Well, what does that mean? Like, is that cholesterol bad? Like, help me understand that. And they just went around in circles. So I got upset at that. I got upset that I was at risk. I worked my whole life really hard, educating myself, building businesses, creating wealth for other people, myself included. I have 2 children, son and daughter, and an adopted daughter as well. and only to find out that I was at a risk of a heart attack and stroke and dropped dead, because we know now statistically, half the population over the age of 40 or 45 will have some type of event, heart attack or stroke, and half of them their first symptom is death, right? So that's scary. And then I got into the point where I was upset that why isn't everybody doing this? Why isn't this the state? Why isn't this the, standard of care? It's been around for a long time, like, CTs, CCTAs, things like that. Now, have been around for a long time, imaging. Now, the FDA approved AI tools that we use have not. That's relatively new, so I understand that. But it's a game changer. It's an absolute game changer. So I said to myself, I'm going to get through the sale of this business, TMG Corp, and then I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to put my time, my wealth, my business acumen, and I'm not a physician. I'm not a doctor. I'm just I'm a patient of Clear Cardio. I'm a businessman, so I know how to build businesses and make profitable businesses. So I'm going to take that acumen and I'm going to put it together towards this particular issue, and that's cardiovascular disease, which causes heart attacks and strokes. And that was the genesis. That was the the ideation of Clear Cardio was. So I got through the sale of the company, and then met with Dr. Osborne. Dr. Osborne had a small Regis office, about the size of my wife's shoe closet, because he's such a kind man. He's such a philanthropist. He wants to save the whole world. I mean, he's a Harvard-trained guy. You should have him on at some point. But he's a remarkable man, but he's just not good at business. He admits that, and so he's been trafficked his whole life. And I call it that. I really just put that tag on there. He's been trafficked, and so, he had a small little Regis office he has so many degrees and licenses. It took up every inch of the walls in his little tiny office. And I said, we got to get you out of here. We've got to wrap a business around what you've been doing and telling people we should be doing for the last 20 something years. And because he stopped doing heart catheterizations 20 years ago. And only uses imaging now. And now with the AI tools, it's even better. He's developed this incredible program, which I follow. Right now, by the way, I have no more soft plaque. I went from no calcium, no calcified plaque, so 0 calcium score, which for all indications would tell me I'm in perfect shape because I looked good. But to having 260 millimeters of soft plaque, now I've got all of that is calcified. So I have effectively a 0 risk of plaque rupture. So no more heart attack or stroke risk. So I'll probably die of cancer. let's hope not. But that's statistically speaking, that's the case. But knock on wood. But so I know the program works because I'm living proof. And so we adopted that program that he's developed. Using some medications if it's necessary. We have significant disease, and that's what we do. And also diet, exercise, all of the things you and I chatted about before we started this podcast was roughly about the functional side of things and the importance of that. Getting your visceral fat down, all that. So that was the genesis of Clear Cardio, and that was almost 3 years ago. Now. We started, I see TMG Core sold in December 2023. So we are now, coming around to almost 4 years, I guess. But that was the ideation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that backstory. It really provides context for everything that you're doing and your sort of personal experience of how you've ended up in this situation and the direction you've taken with the business. So I suppose your experience is quite unique in the sense of probably nobody else is going to have the level of health screening that you had, with that company, paying all this money every year. But what's fundamentally broken about traditional cardiovascular care that the average person experiences in the US?
Well, that's a great question. I can tell you, I was fortunate because I could afford, and the company was paying as well for the private care. Most people can't, and so what happens is they end up what I call in the, kind of like the circle of death, right? So healthcare in America is fundamentally broken. It is quite good once you get the care. The doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners and the folks that are giving the care are outstanding. I think it's one of the best systems in the world, at least from a training perspective. However, to get to those experts, that's where it's all broken, and whether or not you can actually get them. And so, today, if you're my age and you're not symptomatic, or let's just say, I'm 58, okay? Let's just say you're in your 40s, late 30s, early 40s, and you're non-symptomatic, okay? Because a lot of people in their late 30s and 40s and 50s die of heart attacks and strokes, men and women alike. And why do they do? A lot of times because they're asymptomatic and they have a plaque rupture. They didn't know they had significant plaque. They didn't know what plaque rupture was. And I've actually got models and things like that show how it works, and pretty interesting. I've got some videos out there to show how it works. So educating people. But a lot of people are not educated because there's not a lot of information out there about that. So you either have to be symptomatic, okay, which means you have late stage disease, 70% blockage or more, stenosis, the narrowing down of the artery, going from something like this, which is a normal artery, wide open flow, no stenosis, no ischemia, things like that, to something that looks like this, right? Which is, this is about 70 to 80% blocked, right? So reduction in flow. So this is significant stenosis outside in the wall of the artery here. That's where the plaque builds up. So plaque doesn't build up. A lot of people think plaque builds up on the inside. It sticks to the wall of the artery here on that one cell membrane. There's a little membrane on the inside of your artery here, which kind of protects, that. And it's, when you're born, it's like a slip and slide, right? From the 80s, how it's like Teflon. Everything that flows through the blood, everything that's in the blood, the oxygen and cholesterol and all of that stuff, it's just flowing through, and nothing adheres to that lining, that thin lining. As you age, hardening of the arteries, or lifestyle, or genetics plays a big role. Or as you age, you gain visceral fat, fatty liver, diabetes, all of the high blood pressure, hardening of the arteries, things like that. That lining becomes damaged, and it becomes more like Velcro instead of Teflon. And what happens is that cholesterol, in particular, adheres to a certain area in the artery, and then what it does is it gets absorbed into the wall of the artery. It doesn't stay on the lining here. It gets pulled into the artery wall like that, right? So even if you put a camera, like a heart catheterization, down the center, you wouldn't see plaque. You're not going to see plaque and what kind of plaque it is. So heart catheterizations, from understanding the level and the type of disease you have, is useless. It doesn't tell you what type of plaque you have, doesn't tell you where the plaque is, and how much of it is. And we know that, the soft plaque, so if you see the color coding here, the blue is the calcified plaque, the yellow, and we color code it specifically so you can identify it here. But the blue is calcified plaque. We don't care about that because it doesn't rupture. It's stable plaque. So that's old plaque that's turned hard. And then the soft plaque, what we call the medium density, high lipid, think of lipids as fats, like butter, right? That's the yellow stuff. And then in here, the little red stuff, that's the low density, what we call the lava, low density, high lipid plaque. So these two plaques, these yellows and reds, these are the real dangerous stuff. That's the stuff that ruptures through the lining. And it's when it ruptures, which causes, 85 to 90% of all heart attacks, versus, that's the plumbing issue versus the electrical issue, which is the, if you've got AFib or something like that. But in this case, we're talking about plaque rupture. That ruptures into the blood flow, and then your body responds in minutes to seconds, causes the clot. And it's the clot that blocks off the blood flow, which stops oxygen to the brain or to the organs and the heart, and that's what kills you. So this is what it normally looks like. This, and so you can see how it expands out. So this is your normal outside diameter. Then as that cholesterol gets absorbed, as it gets absorbed into the arterial wall, it starts expanding outwards first, pushing that artery so it expands like this. And while it's through that, at the same time, it's pushing down on that on the interior, on the lumen here, and it causes what we call stenosis. and that's causes symptoms, shortness of breath and high blood pressure and all those types of things, right? So normal, not normal. This is so what we do is we identify that right off the bat, like, do you have it or not? So the problem is 90% of the cardiologists out there are not preventive cardiologists, probably more than that. They're not trained to communicate that to patients. Their go-to is, especially an interventional cardiologist, their go-to is stents and balloons, and in some cases, if you're serious enough, revascularization. Effectively bypass surgery, and there's a lot of money in that, right? But oftentimes you're not getting to see a doctor to even determine if you have the disease unless you're symptomatic, because you're depending on your insurance company to pay for everything, the doctor's visits and things like that, because they're not cheap. And it can take a significant amount of time because doctors right now, they're 2-3 months out. So you got pain in chest, okay? Then you go to see your regular doctor, or you go to the emergency room, and they might rush you in to do emergency heart catheterization, right? Which is invasive, can cause heart attacks and strokes, can cause infections, and and then if they do put a stent or balloon in there, all they're doing is addressing the symptom, right? Because stents and balloons don't actually address the underlying disease, right? They don't stop heart attacks and strokes. It's not their job. Their job is to open up, push against the arterial wall here and open up so that you can get more blood flow so you're not symptomatic anymore, right? And so you get but it's not addressing the disease, which is out here in the arterial wall, which you can still rupture right through, even around and stent. So it's just to resolve symptoms. So the biggest challenge I see right now, what's broken, is first of all, people having the education and doctors educating the patients, whether you're a generalist or a cardiologist. It's the dependence on your healthcare insurance to allow you to have your insurance cover you to go see a cardiologist, right? And then what happens? Okay, so if you think about the circle of death that I talked about, you got to have a symptom, okay? Or you're doing, if you're lucky, a lot of guys and girls don't, they go in and they get a checkup and they fail a checkup. Their ECG is weird. By the way, ECGs are for electrical issues. They have nothing to do with plaque. So that's useless when it comes to 90% of the heart attacks and strokes. But it's useful for other things. They put you on a treadmill. You have to fail a stress test, right? In order to actually go on to be referred to a cardiologist, an expert. And we know that stress tests have false positives and false negatives. So if you fail a regular stress test, then they put you and they do a nuclear stress test. They'll look at your calcium score, which only shows you if you have old plaque, let's say if you have active plaque. And then if you fail all those, then they'll say, okay, now the insurance company will pay for doing a heart catheterization. By the way, heart catheterization, again, only treats the symptoms. It doesn't treat the underlying disease. And you can do everything that I just talked about by doing a CCTA, cardiac CT angiogram, which will show you definitively if you have the disease. Then you layer on the AI on top of that, which analyzes 20,000 pixels of imaging on the CCTA. The CCTAs that we use today in the CT machines, we're using state of the art. So it's 620 slices. For those of you who don't know what that is, a 620 slice machine is the most advanced in the world. It's AI enhanced, and it's the amount of pictures it takes of your heart and your system. We can do it from your carotid all the way to your belly button, and we can see with extraordinary detail what's going on. We create a three-dimensional model of almost a perfect three-dimensional model of your exact physiology, your heart, your kidneys, your livers, your everything, bones, structures, flesh. And then we can actually fly down your arteries and all of that. We can do all of that. And then we layer on the AI tools, the plaque analysis tools, which then takes a look at that plaque and categorizes the plaque, quantifies it. So what kind of plaque it is, how much it is, and where it is. And then we tell you what level of disease you have. And then we know how to treat you exactly, how to convert that soft plaque into hard plaque. So we know all of that now. So most people never get there. Most people, half of all people who have a heart attack or stroke, roughly half die, their first symptom. The other half survive. The ones who survive after they have a stroke, significant brain damage, a lot of recovery, a lot of costs associated with that. The others are now getting stents and balloons, or worst case scenario, they're revascularization or they're having bypass surgeries. But that's too late. Like, that's way too late. We know now if you're proactive, then you can help prevent some of those heart attacks and strokes, a significant portion of them, and actually start reversing the disease, slowing down the soft plaque formation, slowing down and speeding up the calcification process, which is stable plaque, calcified plaque, and then ideally eliminating or significantly reducing the amount of new plaque formation that's created, and that's the goal.
So why is prevention such a difficult conversation? I know you kind of earlier alluded to the fact that you have to have a symptom to get seen by the right people, but in terms of patients, how do you persuade someone who feels well that they need investigating?
It's not easy. A lot of it, just believe it or not, unfortunately, it's even today, because it isn't widely known. And insurance for the most part won't cover prevention. Which is a major problem in this country. Again, circle of death, right? They don't value it. I think that is going to change. That is going to change. It is my life's mission. It is Dr. Osborne's mission. It is all the staff here at Clear Cardio and others out there. There's others out there, preventive cardiologists who are out there and care about this. But, they just won't cover preventive. And so the conversation we're having with patients is, because we don't take insurance. We can't. There is no insurance to take, because they reject it every time. We tried in the beginning and it was just futile. So the conversation is, okay, you're over 45, 50. Most of our patients are over 40. Not all of them, but most of them. And for some reason, that's when the light goes off and you're like, oh wait, I need to do something. Or they're having symptoms. But non-symptomatic people, once they find us, they're usually the people that are worried well. The ones that are doing the research, they're out there looking on the internet, but they're still asking the questions. Or if I'm having a conversation at dinner or in an elevator, someone will say, what do you do? Oh, what is that? Oh, why do I care? What's plaque? Is that in your teeth? I mean, like, no, it's not plaque in your teeth. It's the number one cause of heart attacks and strokes. So I always say this: have you had a colonoscopy? Most of them over the age of 50, in their 40s and 50s, will say yes. I'm like, okay, why did you do that? Well, because they told me I should. Why? Well, because I don't want to get colon cancer, right? Polyps. Like, a lot of people are very educated about colon cancer. I said, okay, that's great. I said, it's important to continue to do that. However, cancer in general, compared to heart disease, heart attacks and strokes, makes up a much smaller segment of mortality. And in fact, roughly 2% of cancers are associated with colon cancer. And even fewer, go on to pass away as a result. However, it doesn't mean you don't do it, right? Just because statistically it's lower, because nobody wants colon cancer, but you do it anyways. Okay, great. Now take that and apply that to the number one cause of death on the planet. The number one cause, heart attacks and strokes. And most of them, 85 to 90%, are due to plaque rupture. Don't you think it makes sense that we would have a preventive program to go in there to determine whether or not you have the disease? And if so, to what level? And unlike colonoscopies, where you can go in and remove the polyp and voila, no more cancer or no more potential cancer, right? And so come back in 3 years. You can't do that with cardiovascular disease. What you can do, however, it takes longer is treat it, slow it down significantly, or even stop it and allow that soft plaque, the dangerous plaque that can rupture, to stabilize and convert to calcified plaque. That takes time, effort, and you have to understand the type of plaque you have, where it is, and then your physiology is uniquely yours, and therefore you may have a disposition, genetic disposition in your family, right? So we take family into account. We do blood tests to determine whether or not you have a genetic disposition for, converting cholesterol into plaque, through the arterial wall and all of that. So we look at all of that, right? So wouldn't you say that's even equally as important, or maybe even more important, statistically speaking? And the answer is always yes. Absolutely. I didn't know any of that. Like, of course it is. Yes. Okay, great. Do you take insurance? Nope. We don't take it. Unfortunately, your insurance company won't cover it unless you're symptomatic. And we can't tell you to say that you're symptomatic, right? And most people aren't. And so, they have to lie to their general practitioner and say, I have heart pain or I have something, right? In order to go see a cardiologist, but then they're going to end up with a cardiologist who's ideally, or not ideally, who is most likely a cardiologist who is not doing the advanced systems that we're doing, doesn't understand yet what's available to them, and their first diagnosis is, let's get you on a treadmill, let's do a stress test, let's do your calcium score, CAC score, let's get you in to do a heart catheterization, right? That's their path. That's the path they've been following forever. So the conversation, to your question, it's a challenging one. It's one of education. And it's just telling them what's available to them. And then assuming they can get out of their mindset that the insurance companies have their best interests at heart and that they're going to cover them, and then they have to come out of pocket for it, right? We've worked really hard to get the pricing down as low as we can get it and still be in business, because we can't run a business. And this will go towards the part of this podcast where we talk about how important the business is in order to sustain the technology to be able to get this to the masses. But they have to prioritize where they spend their money. I mean, people walk around with a $2,000 phone. Okay. Our program isn't much more than that, maybe a little bit more, right? Yeah. But it's a phone, right? The phone's important, but the phone's not going to save your life.
Got it. So I guess what you do at Clear Cardio, you're challenging healthcare, you're challenging the status quo, you're asking healthcare to think differently. What sort of resistance have you had, and how do you respond when people challenge what you do?
That's a great question. You got some great questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. A lot of times we'll put in the effort. We don't get a lot of challenging from potential patients or patients. Once patients see it, I'm a believer that when you hear the truth, you know the truth. Like when you hear it, you go, yep, that's true. And you can't argue with facts and truth. And that's what we do. We bombard people with facts and truth. We prove it to you, right? We're not just, it's not just, hey, let's take some medications and trust me. We can show you, because we can do these things, again. And then we show you the images. Here's where your plaque was. Here's where it is today, and we monitor you as we go forward. So it's a proof program, proving that we're treating the disease. But when we're talking to insurance companies on a day-to-day basis, which isn't something that most of my team does, because again, we don't interface with the insurance companies. When I'm having conversations at events or, when I'm doing a podcast, things like that, it's all about, again, just talking about the facts and the underlying, like, how does this benefit you? My father used to tell me, you'll never be successful in business unless the ecosystem that you require to have that business be successful, your suppliers, or things like that, unless they see a vested interest in what you're doing. And so, we take that approach. I take that approach. I say, okay, how can they benefit from what we're doing? Lowering healthcare costs, right? In the case of life insurance, for example, that's an insurance, right? It's not medical insurance, but it's life insurance. They are starting to wake up. We're having a lot of dialogues with some of the biggest life insurance companies out there, and we're able to extend the life in many cases, or at least we're working towards extending the life of their policyholders. And we can also provide them with information that helps them make better decisions on underwriting. So they see the value there. And most of these life insurance companies have a division that does healthcare as well. And so we're hoping and praying, I hate that soft language, but that somehow translates over across the aisle in the offices, in the buildings that they have, and saying, hey, no, there's real value in what they're doing. Let's start covering some of this stuff. Because the minute they start covering some of this preventive medicine, what we do, then we will start taking insurance 100%. They're just not there yet. But as far as talking to patients, when they hear it, they go, oh, I get it. It's just an education process. But when it comes to now private equity firms, completely different issue. Private equity firms or investors in companies that do interventional cardiology do not like us at all, because that is their bread and butter. They get $20,000 to $30,000 per heart cath. They get, $300,000 to $400,000 for revascularization for open heart surgeries, stents and balloons. Add, if you do a heart cath and you add a couple of stents, now you're talking about close to $70,000 to $80,000, $90,000, right? And then they're doing, one heart cath doctor, one interventional cardiologist is required, if they're under the private equity, umbrella of companies, a group, as it were, or even a hospital group, they're required to do, as many as they can do a day. So they're referring people to the cath lab. Well, you got a little thing. Oh, might as well just do a heart cath. Might as well just do a heart cath. And then if they see a 70% blockage, which they could be asymptomatic, they could have no problems. No, it could be all calcified. There's no risk of rupture, but they'll put a heart cath, they'll put a stent or a balloon in there. And then they're on blood thinners for a year, and they're higher risk of bleeding. It can cause a heart attack, infections, things like that. But they're doing it because it's a business. Unfortunately, it's a business for them. And so they don't like us. So we're not having much conversation with those folks.
Got it. So turning now to more the sort of business side of the operation at Clear Cardio, and one thing I really admire is Clear Cardio has really stayed incredibly focused. Rather than trying to become everything to everyone, you've built the business around solving one problem exceptionally well. What's your kind of philosophy behind that, and in terms of that decision, and also how it's affected your growth?
Yes. So again, another good question, and a fundamental question, and it's something that I've learned over the years by making mistakes, is that you've got to specialize. You've got to be focused. So, when I first effectively stumbled onto Dr. Osborne, and then I realized that, there was a huge opportunity to save a lot of lives, myself included. I said, okay, what are we going to do here? Like, do we want to be everything for everybody? Like, because Dr. Osborne he's an internist, he's a lipidologist, he's a PhD, he's all of those things. Do we want to, I want to do this to help save lives. Do we want to do, other things, pain management? Do we want to do, and the answer was absolutely not. Because I learned over the years that, find one thing that you're really good at and own it and be the best in the market at that. Let everybody else let them worry about that other stuff. So I said, what is this issue? It's plaque. Okay, what causes most heart attack? Plaque. So we don't treat people per se. We refer them out if they have AFib and they need pacemakers and they need all of those types of things. That's not what we do. That's a smaller percentage, roughly 5 to 10%. And so to people, there's experts out there. That's what they do. But I recognize that because now we can narrow down our ecosystem. It makes it simpler. Our suppliers, our partners, the people that we depend on and who depend on us to be successful. And we can negotiate better, because that's what we do, and get the pricing down so we can make it more available to more people. So specialization is critical. I think you see that in law, in a lot of industries or things that people do to make money these days, right? So doctors specialize, and a business should be no different, because the minute you start to try to be everything for everybody, you do nothing really well. And so we want to do this. We want to be the best in the world at it and give the best care.
So I want to also talk about education and marketing, because that's a key part of what you do. And I think your colleague mentioned that around 95% of your patients come through YouTube, which is quite remarkable. So how did that happen? And what's your kind of take on education in terms of advancing the business?
Well, I didn't know it was 95%. So you're referring to Sherry Thacker, who's,
yeah, absolutely.
She's remarkable. She is such a rock star. She's such a powerful lady. And she's so engaged in clear cardio. It's like she's made this her life mission, and she's been a health advocate her whole life, written books. But I didn't realize it was 95%. I knew it was. I know we have an affiliate program, which is really exciting, where a lot of our patients have become affiliates, who make referrals, and then we give them discounts, or we give them incentives to bring patients because we want to save lives. We do get some doctor referrals as well. We're a member of the Private Physician Alliance. So, I think we're the only preventive cardiology program within that national program, which is scary that we're the only ones doing this. But yes, YouTube. One of the things that I right from the onset, especially when I engaged, one of the reasons why I engaged with Sherry 3 years ago now, because she's really good at that stuff. That's her mainstay. And so I knew right up front that our strategy was direct to consumer. I knew what that meant because I've done this before, which means we have to be really, really good at social media. We have to be really good. In fact, I invested in, built out, and hired staff. We have our own podcast studio in our headquarters, which is in Carrollton, Texas, and it's right next to the VIP lounge where we bring our patients. So we do podcasts all the time. We do patients. So I knew it was important to get on all social media outlets, Instagram, things like that, and then put a message out there, because I also knew that going direct to consumer in this case, because we don't have a lot of doctors who know what we're doing, understand what we're doing, or care what we're doing, because they're not educated on it, and they're so busy and so overworked, and they're, especially in the cardiovascular space, they're doing balloon stents, bypass surgeries, all of those things, running on treadmills, all that stuff, that they don't have time necessarily to be, thinking about and referring patients to us. So I knew we were going to have to educate people directly. That's a lot of work. That takes a lot of money. When you're breaking ice for the first time, and you're the one that's breaking the ice, people behind you can just follow you, right? It's easier. They're not having to go up against the ice. We're going up against the ice. And so what makes that easier is the educational process. So I knew that was really important in the beginning, which is why we developed, we use AI, and I know everybody's using that term these days, right? But it's relevant in this case, so I'll bring it up. Not only do we use AI on the diagnosis on the medical side of the business, which is critical, and it's game changing. It is really game changing, and it's going to change the industry forever. I could talk for hours about that. But we also use AI on the front end of the business, which is the funnel. And we develop these incredible machine learning tools, AI tools, and funnels. We use programs like Go High Level to develop all of this, to allow for automation and to learn from itself to get better. Because the better we are at that, the more lives we can save. And in order to save lives, we've got to educate people. We've got to get to people. We've got to educate them. We've got to build trust, authority in the market, and then make it easy for them to pick up the phone, right? Or get on the computer and set up We've got to make it easy for them. And, we take that very seriously. It is our mission. We say your heart is our mission. It is absolutely critical. So if we fail at that, we fail at our business, not just from a monetary perspective. Okay, that's the effect. The money comes when you do a good job of taking care of the patient, of educating the patient and taking care of the patient, and showing them, proving to them that what we're doing is improving their lives. Okay, then the money will come because people will see the value. So I knew it from the beginning. Sherry's the one that really does all the education on that side of things. I just support her, but that was critical, knowing right up front that we needed to communicate directly to the potential patients, until we get to the point, and forever, but until we get to the point where we have enough traction where patients are actually advocating on our behalf, which is what's happening now through the affiliate program and so on.
So turning to the future, where would you like to be in 12 months' time with Clear Cardio? Any plans on the horizon? Where are you looking to kind of go with the business and the clinic?
On a beach in Cabo with 100 of my patients and my entire staff celebrating our 10,000th patient, right? Because you've got to celebrate, or otherwise you just like hit your head against the wall because it's hard. This is a hard business to be in. It's a hard business. You've got doctors you're dealing with. You've got malpractices insurance. You've got lawyers up the yin yang protection, and you're dealing with people that are sick or worried well, and they're trusting you. So you've got to be responsive. You've got call centers. You've got AI. You've got medications, and you're dealing with. I mean, it's such a complex business that you've got to celebrate the wins. So 1 year from now, I'd like to be celebrating, 10,000 patients have gone through the Clear Cardio program or are going through the Clear Cardio program. I'd like to be celebrating our next office opening. We have an office. We have 3 offices now, one in Miami Beach, one in Manhattan on Park Avenue, our headquarters in Dallas and Carrollton. We're opening one up in Scottsdale by the end of September. So we'll have 4 locations. My goal is within 12 months to be in California, two locations in California, another location to be determined. So I'd like to have 7 or 8 locations by the end of next year. That'll allow us to be able to meet, see as many patients as we can. Because you have to dial, your ad spend on the social media stuff. You got to dial it right so you don't sell yourself out of business. Because the minute your quality of service drops, well then, one bad review and Trustpilot, we have 5-star, we have hundreds of patients and hundreds of reviews on Trustpilot, all 5-star. You have one star and it drops you down to like 4.8. I think we're at 4.8 because earlier on, I think one patient was having some issues, internal family issues, and took it out on us. It happens. But, all of those things matter. But in 12 months, I want to be in additional locations so that we can cover more people, more patients, and support them. I want to be celebrating those new patients. Obviously I think I'm the sole investor in the company. So I put millions of dollars into this business to get it to where it is today. I'm going to continue to put money into it as we expand, right? And the money that we do make, we reinvest back into the business, and ideally to get costs down as much as we can. But that's where I'd like to be in 12 months, celebrating somewhere with patients and staff on the advancement of Clear Cardio in the United States.
Amazing. Finally, if we were having this conversation in 10 years from now, what would you hope had changed?
Yes. So we are going to get there. So I want preventive cardiology. I want prevention and awareness. The number one killer of all human beings on the earth. I want it to be an everyday conversation about plaque. The same way you talk about the colonoscopy and making sure that people aren't contracting and dying from colon cancer. I want or for breast cancer for that. I mean, there's so much advocacy for breast cancer, and I there should be, because it's a devastating disease and it affects a lot of women and men. By the way, men die of breast cancer too. However, it is a segment of cancer, and we will in 10 years have that level of education, awareness, proactive approach towards the number one killer of all people on the planet today, right today. And I want to see that number decrease.
What a great point to end on. What a fantastic mission. JD, it's been an enormous pleasure. Thank you so much. What I love about today's conversation is that although we've talked about technology and AI, the underlying message is really about changing healthcare from reacting to disease to preventing it altogether. So Thank you very much for sharing not only the vision behind Clear Cardio, but also the realities of building and leading a healthcare company that's really challenging existing thinking. I think our listeners, clinicians, healthcare entrepreneurs are going to take a great deal away from this session. So thank you very much for joining me. It's been absolutely fantastic.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.